Hi there. My name is Dr. Kantu Desai, and I'm a surgical resident at Credit Valley Hospital in Mississauga. What's that? You want to know more about cystic fibrosis? Well, you asked the right guy, because I'm a specialist in cystic fibrosis. So, cystic fibrosis is a genetic disease that primarily affects the function of the lungs, the pancreas, and the digestive systems. It's caused by a mutation in the CFTR protein allele in chromosome number 7 that prevents it from functioning properly. This chromosome can be seen on the karyotype as a mutation and is called the delta F508 mutation. Cystic fibrosis is a disease that is inherited, and determining the specifics requires a lot of genetics. Luckily for you, we have a resident geneticist too in the building, Dr. Kabir Paul Kamboj. Dr. Kabir Paul Kamboj, can you please explain the specifics behind the genetics of cystic fibrosis?
Yeah, sure. So cystic fibrosis is a genetic disease that primarily affects the function of the respiratory system and the digestive systems, primarily the lungs as well as the pancreas. So it follows an autosomal recessive inheritance pattern and is caused by the deletion of the 508th gene out of 1480 for phenylalanine and can be observed by genetic therapists on a karyotype. This means that the locus of the allele is on one of the first 22 chromosomes and isn't actually on the 23rd chromosome, or in other words, sex-linked. Furthermore, for a person to have the disease, he or she must be homozygous recessive and will have two mutated copies of the CFTR gene, one from her mom and one from his or her dad. A person with only one copy of the mutated CFTR gene will be heterozygous and will be a carrier of the cystic fibrosis allele. A person without a copy of the mutated CFTR gene will be homozygous and will not inherit cystic fibrosis at all. So something interesting about cystic fibrosis is that it affects about 1 in every 3,000 Caucasians, with 1 in 25 people being a carrier of it. In fact, Caucasians are 5 times to 10 times more likely to have the cystic fibrosis disease than other races.
To best represent the possibility of a couple having a child with cystic fibrosis, let's use a Punnett square. If capital N represents the normal CFTR protein allele and the lowercase n represents the mutated CFTR protein allele, then it is apparent that there are only 6 possible pairing crosses for this trait. By drawing the Punnett squares for the following crosses, a greater understanding of the inheritance pattern can be found. 3 of the Punnett squares in question involve a homozygous recessive, or a person affected with cystic fibrosis. These types of Punnett squares are not generally possible, as most people with cystic fibrosis don't live long enough to have children of their own, and of those who do, males with cystic fibrosis are infertile. This leaves only 3 Punnett squares. Of these 3, 2 of the Punnett squares can't produce any children with cystic fibrosis. Now only 1 Punnett square is left. The Punnett square tells us that, genotypically, the ratio of homozygous dominant big N to heterozygous big N little n to homozygous recessive little n children is 1 to 2 to 1, with 1/4 or 25% of the children being big N, 1/2 of the or 50% of the children being big N small n, and only 1/4 or 25% of the children being small n. Phenotypically, the ratio of non-cystic fibrosis to cystic fibrosis children is 3 to 1, with 3/4 of the children being non-cystic fibrosis and the remaining quarter of the children having cystic fibrosis. These trends can be discovered and also observed on a pedigree as shown here or in front of you. Let's move on to how cystic fibrosis affects the body and the symptoms and complications resulting from cystic fibrosis. Cystic fibrosis affects the CFTR transport protein that is found in the epithelial cells that produce bodily secretions like mucus. In a healthy human being, the CFTR protein allows ions like Cl- and Na+ to move within a cell and into the body secretions produced by the cell and pull water in from the environment to make these secretions more thin. When the delta F508 mutation takes place on the protein, it is not able to fit itself on the cell wall and cannot help in the transport of ions, leaving the secretions like mucus excessively thick. Cystic fibrosis is unlike other conditions, as the CFTR protein can be mutated in over 1,000 different ways that causes cystic fibrosis to behave differently from person to person. Some of the more common symptoms include abdominal cramps, malnutrition, growth retardation, coughing and fever, sweaty skin and sweaty salt, steatorrhea or fat-containing stools, changes in the chest X-ray. In chronological order, the first complication occurs in newborns. Thick bodily secretion affects the meconium, which is the body's first stool, and can get stuck in the intestines, which requires a surgery to remove. Some of these symptoms are specific to certain complications. Later on in early childhood, pancreatic insufficiencies begin to emerge. The thickened secretions block the pancreatic ducts, which prevents important digestive enzymes from reaching the small intestine. This means that protein and fat aren't absorbed by the body, which can lead to steatorrhea or fat-filled stools, and ultimately can lead to malnutrition. Since insulin isn't able to reach the bloodstream, cystic fibrosis can lead to type 1 diabetes-like symptoms and is often misdiagnosed as type 1 diabetes. Furthermore, the enzymes that are held back in the pancreas break down the body cells and can cause inflammation, cysts, and fibrosis in the pancreas.
In late childhood, lung issues start to appear. In normal lungs, mucus is removed using small hair-like projections on epithelial cells called cilia through ciliary action. When mucus is too thick, it can get stuck in the respiratory tract, all while keeping the bacteria as well as the dust stuck in it. These bacteria can colonize the lungs and greatly deteriorate the lungs condition, known as CF exacerbation. This will eventually lead to inflammation of the lungs, hemoptysis, blood and coughs, and eventually respiratory failure, the leading cause of death in all CF patients. There are also many other complications, and they include infertility in men due to the lack of vas deferens, digital clubbing, which is when the ends of fingers spool downwards, and nasal polypsis, which are tissue growths in the nose. Moving on to the diagnosis. In countries where there is high frequency of cystic fibrosis, infant screening can take place. A blood sample is taken from a newborn in which it is tested from the pancreatic enzyme called IRT, which stands for immunoreactive trypsinogen. This protein is only released when the pancreas is damaged. If the test is found to be positive, the salinity or saltiness of the baby's skin is found. If it is more salty than average, it is confirmed that the baby has cystic fibrosis and treatment can start early.
The primary goal for treatment is good nutrition and healthy weight gain. This means that fat-soluble vitamins like A, E, D, and K, extra calories, and replacement pancreatic enzymes can be given through extra supplements. Pulmonary treatment strives to remove excess mucus and maintain healthy airways. This is achieved through chest physiotherapy, which loosens muscles and strengthens lungs. There are also medications like N-acetylcysteine, Dornase alpha-nuclease that thin out the mucus and make it more workable for the body. Lung and pancreas transplants are also sometimes necessary to ensure survival. Personalized treatments are now being used to work with every individual's specific mutation and needs. A system of lumacaptors and ivacaptors are used to make the proteins work better. The lumacaptors act as a driver and bring the mutated protein to its location on the cell wall, and ivacaptors help it function.
However, a lot of these treatments are very expensive, and many patients cannot actually afford them. Luckily for them, there are countless organizations to help people like these. So some of the larger ones are the Boomer Association Foundation, which hopes to fund the cure for cystic fibrosis and improve quality of life for those who actually have it. Cystic Fibrosis Canada is also a very important one, a foundation that funds research and also financially helps the families that have cystic fibrosis. And the Emily's Entourage, a foundation that hopes to help families with cystic fibrosis as much as possible. Collectively, they have given $200 million to families.
There is no cure for cystic fibrosis, and if you have it, you are doomed to die. But statistically, those who have it are reported to be more happier and have lived a more fulfilled life than normal people. In 5% of all cases, cystic fibrosis is found when a mother kisses her baby for the first time and comments on the saltiness or saline taste of her baby. Lastly, the name cystic fibrosis has nothing to do with how the disease works or where it affects the body the most. Rather, it is named after a 1930s observation of the cysts and fibrous growths of vascular tissue in the pancreas. Till next time, Dr. Kanto Desai and
Dr. Kabir Paul Kamboj.